The hospital corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. Inside room 317, a once vibrant teenage girl sat in a wheelchair, staring out of the window with eyes that no longer dreamed. Her father, one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, stood helplessly by the door, unable to buy back her hope no matter how many millions he had. Then, a single dad, a man with no money, no title, and nothing but kindness in his heart, walked in. He knelt beside the girl, leaned close, and whispered words that would change her life forever. "I'll help you. If you believe in the power of kindness to transform lives, make sure to like this video right now and subscribe so you never miss another story like this, because what happened next will stay with you forever." Ethan Cole never imagined his life would cross paths with someone like Alexander Grant, the billionaire CEO of Grant Industries. Ethan was a single father raising his 10-year-old son, Lucas, on a modest mechanic's salary. Life had been a series of small battles, keeping the fridge stocked, making sure Lucas did his homework, and praying the old truck wouldn't break down again. One rainy afternoon, Ethan's truck did exactly that. He had just picked Lucas up from his after-school program when the engine sputtered and died outside St. Mary's Hospital. Lucas, curious as ever, peered out the window and spotted a girl in a wheelchair in the hospital courtyard, sitting under the drizzle without an umbrella. She didn't flinch as rain soaked her hair. "Dad," Lucas said, frowning, "why is she just sitting there like that?" Ethan's gaze followed his son's. The girl's thin frame, the lifeless way she stared at the ground, the heaviness in her posture, it was the look of someone who had given up. Against his better judgment, Ethan told Lucas to stay in the truck and jogged over with his jacket. "Hey," he said gently, draping the jacket over her shoulders, "you'll catch a cold out here." She barely moved her head. "Doesn't matter." Ethan crouched to meet her eyes. "It matters to me." Before she could respond, a man in an expensive suit stormed out of the hospital, clearly frantic. "Clara! What are you doing out here?" He looked up at Ethan, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "Who are you?" "Just someone who saw she needed help," Ethan replied. The man's expression softened slightly, though his worry didn't fade. "I'm her father. Thank you for trying. But it's complicated." That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Lucas brought her up, too. She looked so sad, Dad. Like she didn't even want to be alive. The next day, Ethan learned the truth. Clara Grant was 16 years old and had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident 6 months earlier. The media had followed the tragedy, painting her as the princess of a billionaire's empire. But no headline captured what mattered. That Clara hadn't spoken to anyone outside her father in weeks, refused therapy, and barely ate. One evening, while visiting a friend in the hospital, Ethan saw Clara again. This time she was in the rehab gym, sitting idly while the therapist tried to coax her into simple exercises. Clara turned away, refusing to participate. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't family. But something in him, maybe the part that had fought to keep his own son happy through years of hardship, pushed him forward. "Mind if I try something?" Ethan asked the therapist. The therapist shrugged, exasperated. "Be my guest." Ethan pulled up a chair in front of Clara. "You know," he began, "my son thinks you're the bravest person he's ever seen." Clara scoffed. "Brave? I can't even walk." "That's not what bravery is," Ethan said softly. "Bravery is living when life gives you every reason to stop. And I think you're braver than you know." For the first time, Clara's eyes met his. There was no smile, but there was a flicker, a tiny spark. That night, Ethan went home and told Lucas, "We're going to help her." Somehow. The following weeks became a ritual. Ethan would visit the hospital after work, sometimes with Lucas, sometimes alone. He didn't push her to walk. He didn't give empty pep talks. He told her stories, about fixing old cars, about how Lucas had once tried to make pancakes without flour, about the time he'd fallen off his bike at 12 and still managed to finish the race. Slowly, Clara began to talk back. Just little comments at first. Then questions. Then, one day, laughter, quiet, cautious, but real. Alexander Grant, the CEO, noticed. One evening, he approached Ethan in the hallway. "You're the only person she responds to," he admitted. "Why?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm not special. I just don't see her as the girl who can't walk. I see her as Clara." Alexander studied him for a long moment, then said, "Whatever you're doing, don't stop." But Ethan didn't know that storm clouds were gathering. Clara's medical review was coming up, and the doctors warned that without significant progress, her therapy would be reduced. She'd be sent home with minimal care, and her chance of recovery would shrink to almost nothing. Ethan made a choice. He leaned down to Clara during one of their sessions, met her eyes, and whispered the promise that would change everything: "I'll help you." From that day on, Ethan became more than a visitor. He became her unofficial coach. He researched therapy techniques at night, practiced them with Lucas in their tiny apartment to figure out how to make them fun, and brought ideas to Clara the next day. They started small, tossing a ball back and forth to build upper body strength, using music to time her arm pushes on the wheels, setting silly challenges like, "Move across the room before I finish this terrible joke." One afternoon, Ethan brought Lucas along with a surprise. An old, beat-up wheelchair from the junkyard. "We're going to race," Ethan announced. "Winner gets bragging rights." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're going to lose." "Big talk," Ethan grinned. Lucas counted down, and the race began. Clara laughed so hard she nearly tipped over, but she beat Ethan by 2 inches. The victory lit something in her eyes that hadn't been there for months. The progress wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Clara began eating more, sleeping better, and even asking to go outside in the hospital courtyard again. Alexander started joining them occasionally, his usual stern demeanor softening as he watched his daughter come back to life. Then came the day of the medical review. Clara's doctors were stunned. She had regained partial sensation in her legs and had the strength to begin assisted standing. "It's a long road," they said, "but she's fighting again." That night, Alexander invited Ethan and Lucas to dinner at his penthouse. Overlooking the glittering city, Alexander raised a glass. "I've built companies, made millions, but nothing I've ever done compares to what you've given my daughter." "Thank you." Ethan smiled, glancing at Clara, who for once didn't look away. "She did the hard part. I just believed in her." But the journey wasn't over. Months passed, and with Ethan's constant encouragement, Clara took her first steps with a walker. The room erupted in cheers, Lucas's voice the loudest. When she stumbled, Ethan was there to catch her. When she cried, he reminded her of the races they'd had, the jokes they'd shared, and the promise he'd made. One evening, as the sun set behind the hospital, Clara wheeled herself to the courtyard bench where they'd first met. "You know," she said quietly, "I thought my life was over. I didn't think anyone could help me, until you showed up." Ethan sat beside her. "Sometimes, we just need someone to remind us we're still here." She smiled. "You did more than remind me. You made me want to try again." The next week, she walked, slowly, unsteadily, but without help, into the therapy gym. The staff froze in shock, then erupted into applause. Alexander cried openly. Lucas jumped up and down. Ethan just smiled, remembering that rainy afternoon. Because sometimes, the smallest promise, "I'll help you," can rewrite an entire life.